Right, so this I have the great pleasure of the last session. It's certainly not the least session. It's we'd like to bring. We're going to have a very interesting, I hope, panel discussion with some experts in the field of family and caregiving. Fantastic. So I'd like to thank everybody for being here and joining us today in the last session of this amazing forum. So Sara, would you like to? Are you going to? Shall we introduce? How shall we introduce this together?
Yes, I'll stay muted and you can introduce it.
It's the best one.
This panel is on family and caregiving, focus on the children. I know we had a presentation earlier in the days that we've been doing this on a similar topic, and it's always a very requested topic for the Allied Professionals Forum. There are caregivers, there are allied health professionals out there, and people living with ALS MND who just want to know more about, what do we do with the caregiving, and specifically focusing on children. So when we were working up the Allied Professionals Forum, we thought that actually having a panel of people from the panel you'll see here who will introduce themselves might be a different way to do it this year, since we're doing the whole Allied Health Professionals Forum differently. And we hope you enjoy it, and we hope you learn something from it. So I thought what we could do is I was going to have you introduce yourselves alphabetically, so there was no there's no hierarchy here, and that would go from Melinda to Anna to Jodi, which goes right across here. And Rachael, did you have anything else to add before that?
Oh, that's fantastic. I am so looking forward to this. Yeah.
Yes, Melinda, that means you're on.
Now I'm unmuted. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What an absolute thrill to be here. My name is Melinda Kavanagh. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and an associate professor in social work at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. It's a beautiful sunny day up here in Wisconsin. I am so excited to talk with my wonderful fellow colleagues. The primary area of research and my clinical practice for many years has been focusing on children and youth who are caregivers across disorders, including ALS. So very excited to talk about some of the support programs and interventions that I've developed and learned from my colleagues who are here today. Thank you.
Am I next?
Yes, you are.
Hello, I'm Anna Kent. I'm a nurse specialist. I'm based in Milton Keynes, work in the community. I work with people with complex neurological conditions and motor neurone disease. It's an honour to be part of this esteemed panel. I think expert in inverted commas for me. And I've been working locally with our local hospice and more nationally with the Motor Neurone Disease Association in trying to draw up support for children affected by motor neurone disease. And yeah, so thank you for asking me to be part of this.
And then Jodi.
Hello, and good afternoon, good morning to you, wherever you are. My name is Jodi O'Donnell Ames, and I'm also thrilled to be here. I'm just excited that we are talking about children in this journey because it's such an important topic. I'm the founder of Hope Loves Company, the only nonprofit in the United States that has the mission of providing both educational and emotional support to children and young adults who either have had or have a loved one living with ALS. And my work is the result of losing my spouse, Kevin, at the age of 36 to ALS and raising children and learning this, how important this resource is. So thank you very much.
So thank you for all introducing yourself. So I think it's really interesting about, we all know and we all understand how important caring for families are and caring for children in the holistic way we care for our patients. And I think it's something that bears on me all the time. And about 7 or 8 years ago, as a team, we thought we really must do something about this. We really must kind of get our acts together and do something really kind of good and helpful and change the way we work completely. So we gathered a team of professionals that would be involved, and we started to talk about it. And then we talked about it. And we talked a little bit more about it. And then we discussed how we could measure it and how we could fund it. And then we thought about the health and safety of it. And then we talked a little bit more. And as it went, 3 years went by and we had done very little. And then there's Anna Kent comes along, and in front of my very eyes, she just goes and does it. And that's why I really want Anna to share and talk about, actually, Anna, what you did, because you just didn't talk about it. You did talk about it, but not like us. You just did it. And I'm just in awe. So please, Anna.
Well, yeah. So in Milton Keynes, as I said, I'm based in the community, and I'm able to work with our local hospice, and we've got a really strong branch of the Motor Neurone Disease Association. And I became very aware that we had 4 or 5 families referred into me, or people with diagnosed with motor neurone disease, and they all had young families, which was unusual. And having made the 3rd referral to the local hospice to gain family support, I thought, why aren't we getting these kids together? Because I'm sure they could provide so much more to each other than I can, because they know what they want, they know what they want to discuss. So fortunately, the people I work with within the hospice were like-minded. So we got together and we went, why don't we just do it? Just do it. We'll see what happens. If it's an abject disaster, at least we've given it a go. So we managed to get a free venue. We managed to talk to various parents who released their offspring, who are obviously very precious to them, for an afternoon where we went to the local skating rink. We watched a game of ice hockey, and we had an amazing time. We didn't do anything that was, I thought, really challenging. There was lots of worries about risk. Well, we knew it was going to be risky. It was ice. So parents knew that. They were up for that. The venues had done their risk assessment. We didn't have to do it. Working with the hospice, we had people that were skilled in dealing with children, and it gave the kids a gentle introduction. We managed to get funding by asking and begging. We talked to my children about what we should put in the goodie bags, because some adults thought a disposable camera would be really helpful. Obviously, that was a very different level of thought. So we talked to the kids. We knew there was a need, and we thought we'd give it a go. And as a result of that, we actually put on an afternoon which was so well received by the kids, and also the parents as well, and the people that attended. No one died. Everyone was happy. Everyone went home. They were fine. And as a result of that, I think we challenged a wider organisational opinion, because we realised that bigger organisations weren't asking, are there children in these families? If you don't know the audience, how can you actually do anything about it? So we just did it. And as a result of that, it happened. We didn't talk about it. We realised after the 3rd event, we should evaluate properly at the time. So we looked at different things. So we've worked, that was our top tip, asked the questionnaire at the time. But I think it's about being brave, collaborating and working with like-minded individuals to actually get going, because we can talk about it. We can go round and round in circles, give it a go. If it works, great. If not, go back and think about how it can be done. So cavalier attitude, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
That actually sounds a lot like some of what Jodi has done. And you actually touched on it a little bit in the beginning when you were talking to Anna, and it came up when we were doing the pre-discussions for this today, where you all talked about the children feeling a little like they were isolated, like they were an island. They were the only ones dealing with the fact that they had a parent or a grandparent who has ALS, MND. So you just, talked about a little bit, and Jodi, I'd like you to also talk a little bit more about that. Like, how do you demonstrate to them that they're not alone? And please, if Melinda, then you have also something to follow up, feel free.
Thank you so much for that excellent question. So how do you inform children that they're not alone? How do you diminish isolation and worry and fear and all of the feelings that they're going through, and many times going through privately? They may not want to share how they feel with their sick parent or their even well parent, because many times children want to be brave for their families. So I think just introducing them is key to other children, giving them the opportunity to have a voice in a group sharing, giving them resources for communication within your own home. The more that they recognize that there are other children out there of the same age, also with parents just like their mommies and daddies, they will feel less isolated. And I think that the best thing we can do as adults and as professionals is to bring these resources to children. And at Hope Loves Company, this is our focus. We provide many programs, including Camp HLC and group shares and Hugs of Hope care packages, and everything that we do is specifically focused on eliminating this challenge of, or eliminating this feeling of, being the only one who has a mom or dad who's sick. I also think that it's really important that we try to work together in this realm. Allowing your families to know what programs you offer and making them really accessible, so that when they're doing the research, they know here are all of the ways that we're supporting families and with children, so that they can have access and utilize those programs.
Brilliant.
I agree with everything that Jodi has said, and all of the work that that I've had the privilege of being a part of, either as the developer or engaging with. The critical piece is to get peers with peers, so that children are engaged with like youth. So when we are doing a camp or we're doing a support program, they get to actually see face to face that there is someone who is in their similar situation. And in the youth training, Y-Care education and training program, it's all done in peer groups, because we found very early on that that is the integral piece, and the critical piece is that making sure they can see and talk and engage with peers who are just like them.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Melinda, I would just wonder if you can also kind of express and explain some of the your experiences that you within your work about children with anticipatory grief.
Yeah, I tell you, this is a huge issue and does not get discussed much, even in the end of life and death and dying conversations. So anticipatory grief is really when someone is expecting a death, right? So those feelings are manifesting that they're grieving this loss that hasn't yet happened yet, but they know it's going to happen. So when we say they're grieving the loss, those losses are things that are so very powerful to children. They're things like their parents' voice, hugs from their grandparent, activities that they always engaged in with the family member who has ALS, who they know that they're losing, but they're really losing those experiences. So what we need to tell children is it's okay to grieve in general, and it's also very much okay to grieve those anticipatory losses and to talk about it and to share it either with other peers, with their school personnel, but understanding that parents often really struggle with this concept because we all want so much to hang on to what we have at that moment. But acknowledging is really important for children, acknowledging that those losses are happening. Sometimes they're incremental and sometimes they just hit all at once. And the person's still there, but these are very important incremental losses that children are experiencing on a daily basis. And we as a society, but also in healthcare professionals, don't always acknowledge those individual losses. So what we can do as professionals is think ahead. Everybody needs to think ahead in this space. So it's about what supports can we provide the children while they're going through these things, being very open and honest and acknowledging that those are losses even before the person who's living with ALS dies. Those are very important. And sometimes those, what we might consider incremental or small losses, are often way more important to the child than we might acknowledge as an adult. So there are a number of resources for children. Particularly, I've worked really closely with the ALS Association, and we have a whole series of books for children across ages. And in every single one of these books for children and youth, we address it head on. We say that these are losses that are happening. Talk to someone about it. We have a new book out for school personnel where we again hit it head on and say these are children who might be struggling in class because of that anticipation of the full-blown grief. But these anticipatory grief moments can be daily unsettling and really difficult if we aren't willing to step in as professionals and acknowledge them and do what we can to support them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the presentation earlier this week, they mentioned the memory box idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that, you know, will, if even bringing up something like doing the memory box and asking the person those questions, if that in itself doesn't trigger at least a conversation then about it as well.
Absolutely. And just reminding ourselves that grief is not a dirty word, and that anticipatory grief is certainly not a dirty word. And with children, we tend to tiptoe and we tend to be afraid to bring up some of these things. So the memory box is letting them explore and really sit with the love that they had with that individual and sit with the things that they have lost, but that they can talk about and share. And so they don't feel like they're in an isolated island, as Jodi said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I think that was really good when you could see the children interacting with each other and having those conversations.
Absolutely.
They were fine. They were absolutely fine. I think it was the adults around going, oh, this could be challenging. In fact, the kids were able to sort themselves out. I think sometimes we're too worried about perhaps giving it, you know.
We're very much too worried. Kids are often light years ahead of us.
Absolutely, because they know what's going on. You know, they have access to so much information. So yeah, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that the children often know what they want and how to access that, and that peer support. I just, you know, from the opportunity to meet up is so important.
And in social work, we often say, meet our clients where they are. So meet them where their needs are at. So working with children in these families, meet them where they are. We don't need to make assumptions where they are because we, as an adult, have our own preconceived notions, but really meet the children where they're at and go from there.
Yeah, so that actually,
I think we sometimes underestimate their resilience really to all of this.
Absolutely.
yes. So
Absolutely we do.
but that also leads me to, you know, you're talking about bringing up the children and talking to the children. And, you know, you mentioned you're a licensed social worker, but, you know, we're in the clinic itself then too. We have the allied health professionals, you know, you have myself, and I know when we first started working with this years and years ago, back in 2004, we had a Marlene Shahosky was our mental health specialist, and it was really also a very big love of hers. But the rest of the clinic team wasn't necessarily as comfortable, you know, bringing up these things. Like Anna said, you know, they're okay talking about, but we maybe aren't. So what is some guidance that you can give us to get over that fear, that hesitancy, so we're more comfortable engaging with the children?
Well, I would love to start with answering that question, and thank you for asking it. And I'd like to say that, you know, first and foremost, recognize that you have to ask. You have to ask in that family if there are children. When you go into a home and you do a home visit, ask, you know, ask about the children are a part of that family. They are a cohesive unit in this journey, and they are really, really important. So start with asking. And then if you're concerned about having this communication that feels authentic and open, you know, have something in your toolkit, have a stuffed animal, have a game, have something that children like. Get the lingo, the language down, know a video game that might be appropriate for that child's age.
Absolutely.
And just, you know,
not a camera, not a disposable camera.
Not a disposable camera.
Put your flip phone away, Sarah.
Right. Use language that's appropriate for that child's age. Use body language that welcomes that child. And really just think about the fact that they most likely know more than you anticipate. They most likely are doing much more than you think. You know, we have seen at Hope Loves Company children as young as 3 providing feedings. We have seen children as young as 6 helping with toileting. So these are children who are very aware, most likely, what ALS is and the impact it's having not only on the person they love, but in their entire family. So, you know, feel free to just be a friend to that child and allow, it's not that you have to say, you know, I'm here for you. You know, you don't even have to go there. Just be a person of presence, of compassion and understanding. And that child will intuitively know that you care. And just, you know, I think that it's a really subtle invitation, but I think that it can be extremely powerful.
I just add very quickly, I agree everything that Jodi is saying. I will say that when I've worked with a lot of healthcare professionals on our Y-Care youth training and support program, and so many of them come into it and say, I don't know, I've never really worked with kids. I'm kind of, you know, nervous. They get into it, and these people are amazing. They are so extraordinary when they just kind of jump in and have these conversations with the kids. But what I see is the flip side. I see how excited the children are to be able to know what an occupational therapist does, what a physical therapist does. What do you mean you're a respiratory therapist? You know, they're engaging in learning about the professions. They're feeling confident because they have this big professional person helping them learn these care skills and tasks. And then they leave and they feel like, wow, I could actually talk to this professional, whereas before I didn't know enough about them. I didn't know how to communicate with them. So I'll just add that it's a real two-way street here, that we want the professionals to build that confidence and that encouragement to just talk to them, as Jodi said. But when we see that happening, the kids blossom and they really feel like they have something to say and someone's hearing them. These important professionals are hearing the kids. And that's something that we just cannot put any sort of dollar sign on, because they're now part of that conversation in a lot of ways they've never been. So just to point up that two-way street that goes along.
And just to add to it,
What?
no one's expecting you to go in as, you know, an expert. It's starting that conversation. You know, it's knowing the resources that you can then refer into, because then you're not going to have to hold that on your own. It's starting the conversation, working in collaboration, and just, you know, dipping your toe in the water. You know, don't ignore it. It's there. And I would also say, you know, not just children in an immediate family, but grandchildren. Think about the extended family. And the other thing I'm really passionate about is the fact that these are our future. These children are our future. These could potentially be our future therapists, nurses, social workers, researchers. You know, they're our future. So I think we need to invest in them.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just add very quickly, you're absolutely right. And many of the children become nurses and doctors and physicians because of the experience of being a caregiver as a young child. We've seen it again and again. Also, perhaps consider, and I want to give a quick kudos to many people on this call in the chat, because you have definitely demonstrated this at Camp HLC and at these programs that we're all speaking of. So thank you so much for demonstrating these qualities. But also recognize that you can have a quick meeting as a staff, as a team, as a clinic, on how to talk to children, how to, you know, when you go into a home, how to address them, and just have a quick conversation about it, because that may help to alleviate some of the fear.
Yeah, can I address one of the questions in the chat? Rachel, is that okay with you?
Yes, of course, go ahead.
Yeah.
If you ladies as well, somebody is asking about getting people to be ready for the conversation. And I think that kind of fits right in to this conversation now. So I don't know if you've seen it, but you know, some people are willing to talk, but some people aren't.
Are you referring to children or to adults?
I understood it was from adults talking to children. Is that correct? Yes. Well, I don't know. I just say my personal opinion and let Anna and Jodi jump in, but I'll just say really quickly, I don't think that there's a perfect time and there's no kind of definitive preparation. That the key really needs to be normalizing conversations. Do it when you're randomly watching TV or having breakfast, something where the kids are just kind of normally living their lives. Make it a part of your daily conversations, because if you separate them and make a really big deal out of it and say, now we're going to have this really important conversation, then the kids are kind of worked up. You're a little worked up as the parent. Sometimes that's where we see a lot of anxiety and some potential conflict, but just make it a part of your daily conversations. How are they doing? Check-ins. This is what's going on. So those are the first things I'll say, and let Jodi and Anna jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say that if a parent or grandparent is really uncomfortable initiating this conversation, perhaps find someone who can. Because you do want to have communications. You do want your child or grandchild to be prepared and to feel like he or she can talk about this. You know, their minds are probably worried and concerned, and you want them to have that open communication. Also, having this discussion with a book in place is great, because when children read, they can connect to characters or with characters in the book, and intuitively or authentically, they will ask questions related to the character in the story that will help encourage this discussion. So just even beginning with a story a children's book about ALS, or as Calamite and Melinda mentioned, the ALS Association books. This will be a great resource and tool to beginning a gentle conversation.
And I think also based on that, and based on the work that's been going on in the UK, the Motor Neurone Disease Association have really developed some really good resources now, including an interactive website, MND Buddies. But I think, as you're right, people don't have to do it on their own. There are other sources of support. But I think it's making it normal and not making it a huge, great big deal, because again, children will often have found out a lot more than we give them credit for.
Right. And one thing I want to address, someone made a comment about keeping them ongoing. Oh, that is so critical. As the disease progresses and changes and new things are happening, keep that conversation going. It should never be kind of a one-off or kind of only on occasion. If you normalize it as part of the daily conversation in our life and our family's experience, then you can build on those conversations and have them as things change. And then we get to that point where we talked earlier about the anticipatory grief and the loss. And you've really built up this kind of foundation for the children to be able to have those conversations. I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I think someone made a really nice comment in the chat about that.
Mm-hmm. We had a patient recently who was having real problems eating and drinking and swallowing and speaking, and clearly needed a peg. And we discussed it and he agreed, but he wouldn't have it because he didn't want to upset his son. And he didn't want to have his son look at his peg, and it went round and we talked and discussed it. And this went on for quite some time. And then he came back and he said, okay, I'll have it. And I said, okay, so what's changed? And he said, my son said to me, do you know what you need, Daddy? You need a hole in your tummy. And it's like, right, thank you very much. And he had, the son had no idea about pegs, but he had a solution. So he knew, and had they only been able to talk, and all the help that we tried to give them to enable them to talk to each other, the child did it on his own, really.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I just want to add too, if you don't mind, piggybacking on both, is that recognize I raised 3 very different children who dealt with grief differently.
Yep.
So recognize that within your own family, that your children may react to these discussions and have separate needs. So it's just something to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Jodi, thank you. And just kind of leading on to that, I'm going to ask you all if you can help us to understand what happens with children when they're no longer kind of having that caregiver identity, and can you give us practical strategies for helping us to deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
Shall I start with Melinda?
Yeah, so I think the very first thing we can do is continue the openness in the conversation and let them grieve and express how they have felt being a caregiver, how they feel maybe now that they're no longer a caregiver. We need to, in general, normalize the caregiving situation so that it's not an awkward, uncomfortable, difficult thing to have a conversation about. But second of all, we need to recognize that when children are providing care, frankly, when anyone's providing care, but particularly when children are providing care, they're often really developing a sense of confidence and a sense of care and love and nurturing to that person or to other people. And so while you want to make sure they have that time to grieve the loss, to be able to really feel that, you also want to be able to encourage them that they've done some amazing things, and how can you continue that, whether it's volunteering somewhere, or, a lot of the children in our families in ALS are deeply involved in advocacy and fundraising programs. And it's never anything that we should require the children to do. But what I'm saying is that helps tap into all of those feelings of altruism and care and compassion and confidence that they built up that you want to encourage. And as Jodi said, a lot of the youth end up being social workers or nurses or physicians simply because they've really developed that. And so it's important to encourage that and not shut it off and say, okay, now that someone has passed away, you're no longer the caregiver, so just go back to being whoever you were before. And the truth is that care has really deeply embedded into their identities. Whether they want to be a caregiver again or not, we need to acknowledge what that's potentially given to them in their lives as a child and a caregiver.
Go
I
ahead.
think we've also noticed that some of the children who've lost family members through MND have actually come back to some of the events that we've held, which has been really good. And I think that's been hugely important, that the children were still included in the invite, and then they self-selected if they wanted to come along. And so I think we weren't, again, too exclusive. I think that was really important.
Yeah, and I'll also add that the whole idea of Hope Loves Company is to provide the resources that children need during this journey, which is included after loss. And what we have seen, which is just an amazing thing, is that the children we serve do outgrow our programs and they come back to volunteer, to be ambassadors, to be a voice, to be proactive. And we are very proud to say an example of this success is that we now have our first board member who was a child caregiver. She lost her mom to ALS in 2015, attended several of our camps, our ambassador program, and now she's a board member. So that is really the goal that we all have here, is to provide the resources that children need to be healthy and to feel good about what they've done, and to provide these resources eventually and assistance perhaps to children who are now experiencing what they did, to be able to maybe give it back if they're comfortable doing that. And we found so far that it's been very successful, that children feel good, or young adults feel good about now being buddies to children who've had this, who are now going through caregiving.
There's been a lot of discussion about resources. I'd like to spend a few minutes of time, and take your time, and let's make sure that people know where to find these resources. I know some of it's happening in the chat box, but I want to make sure that when people leave here today, they think, I can go here, I can find this. Anna, would you like to start? Or
Sure. And I think it's about looking internationally, isn't it? Because there's some amazing stuff out there. So I think, I've learned a lot talking with the rest of the panel. So there's a lot more out there. I mean, I think from in the UK, the Motor Neurone Disease Association resources that have been developed really with input, huge amounts of input from Laura Willicks, amazing publications out there, looking locally at your young carers support groups, maybe the local hospice, your local Motor Neurone Disease Association support group. On the MNDA website, there's age appropriate resources from the Interactive Buddies website to stories and workbooks. They're age appropriate. For older ones, there's financial grants, and there's a website forum. There's a helpline specifically for young people called Young Connect on motor neurone disease. Most recently, there's an innovation via the Motor Neurone Disease Association in relation to providing counselling, which is available. It's in partnership by the MNDA and Barnardo's. There's also a pilot project in relation to memory boxes, which are more MND specific. Again, huge amount of work by Laura. So I think it's looking at what's available locally, nationally, and now I think internationally, definitely.
yes, I think the MND buddies and the memory box links at some point were put in the chat box.
Yeah.
How about Jodi?
Yes, well, within the United States, I think many organizations are beginning programs to recognize and support children and families. So kudos to all of you. At Hope Loves Company, as I've said, we spend every single day with this specific focus. So we run 6 camps across the United States, and all of our programs are free of charge for our families. We have group sessions twice a month, which are situations where children, we had one just recently, can call in on Zoom and we just talk about how our day is and how things are going. So we have group shares. We also have family shares. In addition to that, we have a scholarship right now. We're offering 3 scholarships to children whose lives have been affected by ALS and are furthering their education. We send Hugs of Hope care packages, and on average, we send out about 5 a week, which is just with a book that gently explains ALS and a card, a toy, and a shirt, and just allowing these children to recognize that they're not alone. We let them know we're here for them. So within the United States, we're doing the best we can to provide these services. You can reach out to us at www.hopelovescompany.org, and we can be found on all social media platforms. And I am open to, and I know our executive director, Kara Haggerty, as well. We're open to talk to anyone who is interested in expanding the resources that they are providing for their children and families. So thank you.
So I'll bring up the rear. I am so thrilled that I was a clinical social worker for many, many years, and that's why I study this. I saw children in clinic. I went to do home visits and saw children deeply involved in care and having 0 resources whatsoever. So this idea of bringing resources to not only the children and the families, but the professionals is really one of my crusades in life, if you will. So I've been incredibly fortunate to work with the ALS Association. So I've had several research grants that has allowed me to interview children and youth across the country about their experiences with ALS. And so when we talked earlier about the books that we have for children and youth, these are all real kids. These are their real stories. These are their absolute individual perspectives. And so when kids read these books, they're knowing that this is where we're putting that peer-to-peer together, right? So these are real kids and their real experiences. We have a book, a graphic novel for young kids. It's in English, but it's actually, I've worked with the Swiss Association. I don't know if anybody's on the call from the Swiss Association. They're fabulous. We've translated that to French and German. We have a middle-aged, I shouldn't say middle-aged, tween teen book that is really built like a choose your own adventure. What would you do? And we profile kids who have made different decisions about talking to people, reaching out for support, who they engaged with, so that helps these kind of tween-age children say, well, maybe I'll do what this person did, or maybe I'll do something different. And then the third book is really for older teens and young adults. I know Connie from the Netherlands is on this call. Her daughter, Manouk, was interviewed for that book and gave us some extraordinary insight into what it's like to be an older teen or a young adult when you're trying to start your own life, and yet you are caring for someone that you love so much. Maybe you want to get married or you want to have kids. So all of these books are informed by the research in their interviews. We do have also a book that is also informed by the research and interviews for families. So those of you who are on the chat asking about how do we start that conversation? What does it mean like? this book on ALS and families really targets that, how to help you think about framing these conversations and doing it in such a normal everyday life. And then the last book is really targeted for school professionals, because youth spend so much of their days in school. This really helps the teachers, the social workers, the school personnel, the counselors, capture these kids and provide support for them in a way that, again, normalizes their experience, doesn't isolate them, doesn't separate them, but helps educate the school professionals to know, how can we support these kids? And then lastly, the Y Care program. I've mentioned it several times. So it's a youth training and education program. One of the biggest things I found is that children and youth have no training, despite the fact that they're doing a lot of care. So this is a multidisciplinary program. We have physical therapists, occupational therapists, respiratory therapists, neurologists, social work. Yes, our neurologists sit and have lunch with the kids. It's the best thing ever. It's pure entertainment. And they love it. And it's an opportunity for kids to work with kids, and for all these professionals to learn about youth and train youth and support youth. And all of the books, I just saw someone posted, all of the books are available on the ALS Association website. The Y Care program, we have our own full website. It's all in collaboration. It was primarily developed with the Wisconsin chapter. I know some Wisconsin folks are on the call. On Wisconsin. So, you know, really that information on Y Care, you can email me, you can email the ALS Association. We've tried to put everything out there as engaging. There's, you know, no cost associated. And we would love to, I know I saw some other chats, some people are looking to translate the books to different languages. Yes, 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 and yes. I think you should contact Kim McGinnis at the ALS Association, and she'll work with you. But again, we've already translated in a couple languages. I've worked with the Netherlands Association. They're considering translating them. So yes, absolutely. Thank you all so, so much. I'm done.
Wow. Do you know what?
I'm never really done, but you know, I'm
there is literally steam coming off the chat. It is so hot. There are more than over 100 messages there, and I cannot keep up with it. But if you can put your information there, I think the conversation will carry on for a while.
I think Melinda highlighted something really important about resources for schools and teachers.
Yes.
Because I think it's about educating the people in schools, because we're still talking a relatively rare condition. So there's an ignorance. So people perhaps aren't really aware of what's happening and what potentially will happen. And, you know, supporting the children, writing the letters for the exam boards, so hopefully it gives them, you know, a better understanding. It's all of that. So I think that's really important, also involving schools, obviously with the consent of the individual.
Yeah, I'll add to that very quickly that our ambassadors are writing a letter to their teachers. So once that letter has been edited and ready to go, we will share that. But our ambassadors, you know, have continuously said that their teachers and counselors and coaches may not understand what's really taking place at home. So they're penning a letter to best explain it.
That's fantastic, Jodi. That's actually one of the places that was at your conference last year, where the one woman mentioned that she just didn't know how to say to anyone at school, didn't know how to explain to her teachers.
Yeah.
And right from the words, from the mouths of the children. So
right. So so that would be something that would it be like a template then?
Yeah.
Is that what you're working on? That's fabulous. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Sara, did you have anything else to add?
Well, I had written down a question about the school, so I'm very glad that that was brought up. And then there are some questions. I've been monitoring the chat as well. Are we ready? Are we open for questions now, Rachael?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
So there are some questions about support groups for, like, we discussed the written resources or the online resources. How about support groups for these young caregivers?
As I mentioned, Hope Loves Company runs 2 a month. We run them on Wednesday and Thursday evenings. Everything is on our website, hopelovescompany.org. They are open because of Zoom and because of the current situation, they are open to anyone. And we always have a counselor as well as one of our HLC staff members on the call. They're typically 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's been, we've had up to 10 children on the call, and it's just been an amazing opportunity to really connect on a different level with the children we serve, because they are at home and in their own environment, and they they're with their peers, and sometimes you learn more just from listening than anything else.
I will say many years ago, I learned the hard way. Many years ago when I was a social worker, I learned the hard way that often putting kids in a little circle and saying, okay, now everybody talk about your feelings and emotions. I always love to tell people that was my baby social worker, like huge, big mistake, lots of learning there. So what has worked out when we can get more face-to-face is having support groups in the context of activity, in the context of doing something that they are enjoying. We used to take our groups on putt-putt golfing outings or bowling or, even going to the mall. And in the context of these normal activities, you can have conversations about, so how are things going? So they aren't feeling on the spot, and they aren't feeling like I have to suddenly emote, and that can be very uncomfortable for children. So framing the support group in the context of a normal, fun, typical activity can be incredibly helpful to get them to talk about their feelings. I see Anna's head nodding.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened when we got the children together, when we were doing fun things, and they were exchanging mobile numbers, and and they were making those support and witnessing conversations, with someone who'd come along who'd lost a very close family member, talking to someone else quite openly about it, and this sort of like, oh, well, I'm really sorry, and then they carried on. They didn't burst into tears, they talked, and because they got it, they looked, they understood.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to echo that those comments that we've been having since March. We've been having these group shares, and we had a young boy, 10 years old, whose father is living with ALS, and he's been joining, but both his sound and picture were off. And the last session we played video games, and in the chat he wrote, "I'm ready to do a voice and picture reveal." So that brought him in a way that he was most comfortable. So it's very important to have activities that will be the focus for that interaction and engagement and possibly conversation.
Yep.
And I think when we did our activities, we went to, when we had sort of single children in a family, we weren't too precious about if they wanted to bring their best friend along or whatever, because they felt it meant that they came.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was really
a great
important.
idea.
Yeah, made it safer, and then it meant that they were involved rather than not coming because they didn't know anyone and they didn't want to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
We've done the same thing at Camp HLC. We've allowed children to bring their best friend.
Yeah. While Jodi just mentioned that, let me just put a little plug in for that virtual camp. I had the opportunity to attend a weekend long Hope Loves Company virtual camp, and wasn't sure exactly what I was getting myself into, but she did an amazing job of making this experience feel like a camp experience with s'mores and a campfire and sing-alongs and dance-alongs and everything, and the kids were broken out into the different age groups, and it was just amazing. So I would ask anyone to reach out to Jodi for that, information.
Thank you, Sarah. You did a great job. You were just a natural when it comes to being with kids and being enthusiastic and fun. And the whole Hope Loves Company team and all the volunteers that joined us, and the children and the families, they're really what make the experience so phenomenal.
Brilliant. Sarah, is there anything else on the chat that you want to bring in?
So I just want to mention that there's been a lot of, again, to go back to the resources, because I know, again, when people leave, that's what they're going to want. And the International Alliance has, it is in writing here, is making a commitment to putting resources in a library of sorts on our website. It is, certainly one of the things that we're actually looking at is addressing the website itself. So these resources will be available. Other than that, I haven't seen any new questions, but we do have some time here. I would like to give the panel an opportunity to, if there was something that they wanted to say, missed saying, or they caught a question in the chat, because it's a little difficult sometimes to see all the questions. If they caught something that they want to respond to, this is then the time to do it, please.
I would like to say one thing, and this is a response to, there was a couple, I've lost them now because, as you said, there's a lot of chats. So it was in there somewhere. People were making comments about, should youth be involved in care? Is this appropriate? And I just wanted to kind of circle back to that, because as a social worker, I spent a lot of time as a practicing social worker thinking about this and thinking about it in terms of, being a mandated reporter, and what is abuse and what is neglect, and how is that kind of seen in the context of being a caregiver as a child. And while I don't have, kind of the all-knowing final answer, I think it is critical for us to think about it in the context of families as a whole. So in the absence of true abuse and neglect, being a young caregiver, being a caregiving youth in and of itself is not abusive. And I think it's important for us to think about it, kind of take a step back and look at, as we talked about earlier, what are the positives that children get out of this? And what positives do families get out of it by working as a family to help and support each other? But at the same time, as professionals, being very, very aware of asking about, are there youth in the home providing care? What are they doing? How can we support you? So when we see that it crosses that line into maybe some negative, it's typically because there's no supports for that family, and they're relying on what they have on hand. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, it needs to be a collaborative effort, not immediately saying it's a negative and, we need to remove the child from the home or remove this situation. What supports does the family need as a whole? How can we support everybody? And then how can we look at the positives and the strengths that come out of not only the youth, but the family as a whole? And that's where I think these resources, the camps, the support and training programs, the online programs, I really encourage everybody to engage them as much as possible, because that's where we can move away from the conversation about, oh, it's bad and we need to just remove the kids. So I just wanted to bring that up. It was somewhere in the chat earlier, and I get that a lot when I present at research conferences. Every single time I get at least one person coming up to me and chastising me for even doing this research. And so I just think it's, oh yeah, it happens all the time. And that, and it's okay. It's about educating people. It's about educating everybody that we have to do better for these kids and their families. So that's all I'll say about that.
And it starts off with that initial question, isn't it? Are the children? If we don't know, how can we know?
Mm-hmm. Completely.
Are there children, and how are they doing?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
How are they doing?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And, you know, in the US, I know there's a lot of folks from around the world on the call, but in the US, I will say pointedly, we do a terrible job of even asking about kids and families, much less children and youth being caregivers, regardless of the disease state. They are left out of all state and national programming. They all begin at the age of 18. We have nothing at a national or a federal level for anyone under the age of 18. So these are kids who don't enter into the conversation. So of course, our knee-jerk reaction is it's a bad thing. But I hope that this is one thing we can kind of collaborate internationally on, or really get the ball rolling here in the US, that this is not intrinsically in and of itself a bad thing, and that we can, as professionals, can do better.
Brilliant.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jodi, did you have anything to add to that?
Now, one of the things I'd like to add, it's a little off topic, but I find that it's extremely helpful when I do share it. And this is a personal story. So as I have said several times, I've raised 3 children. But for those of you who don't know my story, I lost my husband to ALS. And we had 1 child together. And the man that I remarried, Warren Benton Ames, lost his wife to ALS. And he and Tina had 2 children, Nora and Adam. So having 3 children in this with this experience has taught me many, many things. And the first thing that it really taught me was the relevance of communication, memories, resources. I mean, so many things. But the one thing that Alina and Kevin and I did was to create a lot of cards and memories, written word, written some tapes and experiences. And Tina and my husband Warren did not do that. And so I have found that it's important for me to remind families. One of the things that Kevin and I did when he was at late stage is I read his lips when he was vented, and we together penned 10 cards for every milestone for Alina. And we have 1 left, which is her wedding day card. And it's his thoughts and my writing, and it's on a card, a wedding card. And to have that in the other room, she's now engaged, and to have that for her just means the world to me and to her, and I can assume Kevin too. So I just think it's important to, I know it's a very frightening thing to think about, but I know that every time my grown children come home, they go right to their photo albums and right to the memories that they've had. It's a comfort thing when they're here. And so I just wanted to share that it's been a gift to us, and it may be a gift to your family as well.
Jodi, thank you so much. I think that's the most powerful note that I think we could possibly finish on right now. But I think I think we've probably exhausted all the questions in the question box. There's only one little one just at the bottom there now that I haven't. So I cannot thank you enough, all of you, for your absolute dedication and entertainment and knowledge and wisdom. Thank you so much to Jodi, Anna, and Melinda on your presentation. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And thanks to everybody on the chat. You guys are on fire. I'm like, woo! Amazing.
Brilliant.
Keep up the good work, everyone.
Yeah. Woo!
Thank you.